"I can heal your daughter's legs," the beggar boy whispered, his voice trembling but confident. The words echoed through the cold marble halls of the hospital as the millionaire father stared at him, dumbfounded. Everyone turned. Nurses, doctors, even the little girl in the wheelchair raised her eyes. Silence. You could hear a pin drop. The man standing there wasn't just any millionaire. He was Charles Wexler, the iron-hearted CEO known for crushing competitors and never believing in anything he couldn't buy. And the boy? He was barefoot, his clothes torn, his hands black with city dust. But his eyes held something different, something unshakable. This wasn't just another day in Charles's life. This was the moment his entire world would start to unravel and rebuild. 2 weeks earlier, Charles was at the peak of his empire. Lavish parties, deals worth millions, headlines praising his business genius. But behind those newspaper covers and steel-plated smiles hid a man broken by one thing he couldn't fix: his daughter, Lily. After a tragic accident, doctors told him she'd never walk again. He tried everything: specialists from Germany, surgeries in Switzerland, alternative medicine from the Amazon. But nothing worked. Her legs were lifeless, and her laughter gone. Each night, Charles sat by her bedside, holding her tiny hand, watching the light in her eyes dim a little more. And in those quiet, painful hours, his wealth felt more like a curse than a gift. And to the day, he ran into the beggar boy on the hospital steps. The boy had been there every afternoon, sitting quietly, watching people walk in and out of the building. At first, Charles ignored him. Just another part of the city's chaos. But then, one day the boy approached. "Mister," he said, looking up with those piercing blue eyes, "I've been waiting for you." Charles frowned, ready to wave him away. But then the boy said something that made him freeze. "I can help Lily walk again." How did he know her name? How did he know she couldn't walk? Charles's guards moved to push the boy away, but he raised a hand calmly. "I don't want money," he said. "I just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes with her." Absurd, crazy, dangerous. That's what anyone would think. And Charles did too, at first. But that night, something kept him awake. The boy's voice, his eyes, the eerie certainty in his words. Charles had faced ruthless billionaires, courtroom battles, hostile takeovers. But this boy scared him in a different way. Not because he threatened him, but because he brought hope. And hope, Charles had learned, was dangerous. Still, the next morning, curiosity and desperation won. He asked the hospital staff to let the boy in. They brought him to Lily's room. The boy stepped in slowly, hands folded, a small wooden box under his arm. Lily looked at him, eyes dull but curious. "Hello, Lily," he said gently. "Do you believe in miracles?" She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The boy opened the box. Inside were old, worn-out herbs, little vials of liquid, and something that looked like sand. He knelt beside her, spoke words Charles didn't understand, and placed his hands on her knees. Then he whispered a story about a river that healed the broken, about stars that whispered to those who listened. It sounded like nonsense, fairy tales. But then Lily gasped, a small, sudden gasp. Her fingers gripped the bed rail. Her eyes widened. "Daddy," she whispered. "I felt something. I felt warmth." Charles stood frozen. The room was quiet again, but the silence wasn't empty this time. It was full of wonder, of fear, of possibility. What happened next would change their lives forever. Lily's words sent a shiver down Charles's spine. "I felt something." He rushed to her side, scanning her legs, searching for any twitch, any sign. "Where, baby? Where did you feel it?" he asked, his voice cracking with something rare, vulnerability. Lily pointed to her toes. There, like a spark, like little lights dancing inside. Charles turned to the boy, eyes wide. "What did you do to her?" But the boy wasn't afraid. He simply smiled and said, "I just reminded her legs how to listen again." The words made no sense, but something deep inside Charles, a part buried for decades under contracts, ambition, and cold logic, started to believe. Not understand, not accept, but believe. The hospital staff didn't. They called it a stress-induced response, a coincidence. They told Charles it wasn't real, that her nerves were too damaged. But over the next few days, something undeniable happened. Lily started to feel more. Her feet twitched. Her knees responded to touch. She even laughed again. Real laughter. Loud and joyful. The kind Charles hadn't heard since before the accident. And every afternoon the boy returned. He brought no machines, no charts, just stories, touch, calm, and an old melody he hummed. The same every time. Lily called it the river song. Charles started listening too, from the hallway, heart pounding with every note. But not everyone was enchanted. The media got wind of the visits. Rumors flew. Some called the boy a scammer, a street magician. Others claimed he was the reincarnation of a healer. One news anchor dubbed him the boy prophet of Fifth Avenue. And soon Charles was under pressure. Investors, doctors, even friends demanded he stop the visits. It's dangerous, they said. It's insane. But Charles, the man who never hesitated to cut off what didn't serve him, refused. If you'd seen what I've seen, he told his board, you'd question everything you thought you knew. Then came the storm. A live video leaked. Footage of the boy humming over Lily's legs, her toes visibly wiggling. It went viral. Millions watched. Debates erupted. Some said it was staged. Others said it was a miracle. Reporters camped outside the hospital. The lobby swarmed with curious onlookers. Through it all, the boy remained calm, quiet, focused only on Lily. But it was getting harder to protect him. Security got tighter. And then one day the boy didn't come. Lily waited. Charles waited. An hour passed. Then two. Nothing. The nurses called the entrance desk. No sign of him. Charles sent men to search the area, scan footage, check shelters. But the boy had vanished, as if he had never been real. Panic set in. Lily cried. He promised he'd come back, she sobbed. That night, Charles sat by her side, broken, angry at himself for ever letting someone into his guarded world. But just as he closed his eyes, he heard it. The river song, faint, from outside the window. He rushed to the glass. But there was no one, just the city lights and a quiet breeze. Still, when he turned back to Lily, she was standing, wobbling, shaking, but standing. The doctors were stunned. Impossible, they whispered. But it was real. Charles wept, not just because she walked, but because the boy was right. Her legs had remembered how to listen, and he, Charles Wexler, had finally remembered how to feel. News of Lily's recovery spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire's daughter walks again after mysterious street boy's visit." The world watched in disbelief, and Charles found himself flooded with requests, interviews, scientific inquiries, even offers to buy the rights to the story. But Charles declined them all. He wasn't ready to talk, not because he feared backlash, but because part of him still didn't understand what had happened. And more than that, he missed the boy who had walked into his life with dirt on his hands, but magic in his soul. The boy who had given him back his daughter, and something else, faith. Lily was walking now slowly but confidently, her little hands clutching the rails in the hospital corridor. She smiled at strangers. She hummed the river song, the same one Charles now heard in his dreams. It haunted him, but not in fear, in longing. He needed to find the boy, thank him, help him, understand him. He hired private investigators, traced every street around the hospital, questioned dozens of people. But no one remembered seeing him leave. Some said he wasn't real at all, just a shared hallucination created by grief. But Charles refused to believe that, because he had seen him, he had heard him, and Lily she had walked. Weeks passed. Life started to return to normal, almost. Charles went back to his boardrooms, his offices, his empire. But things felt different. He no longer barked orders. He asked questions. He smiled. Sometimes. His employees noticed. So did the press. Charles Wexler has changed, one magazine wrote. They speculated on why. A new woman? A scandal? No, just a barefoot boy with ancient eyes and an unshakable truth in his voice. And one day, a letter arrived. No return address. No stamp. Just a single piece of folded parchment. Inside, written in uneven childlike handwriting, were 5 words. The river remembers its promises. That was all. But Charles knew. It was him, the boy. Somewhere he was watching, not asking for anything, not even credit, just reminding Charles of what mattered, of what healed. Charles clutched the letter to his chest and cried for the second time in his adult life. Not from sorrow, but from awe. He started a foundation in the boy's name, even though he didn't know it. The River Project. Its mission? To provide healing, not through science alone, but through compassion, connection, belief. They brought storytellers into hospitals, musicians, touch therapists, elders from forgotten cultures. It was mocked at first, called pseudo-nonsense. But it worked. Children laughed. Parents cried. Some even healed in ways no one could explain. And Charles? He no longer cared about being understood. He cared about being useful. Because someone once, with nothing to his name, had taught him the value of giving without expecting anything back. And yet, through all the good, one question still burned inside him. Who was the boy? Where had he come from? And why had he chosen Lily? Charles didn't know. He might never know. But then, one evening, as he and Lily were walking near the river that cut through the city, something caught his eye. A figure, small, quiet, sitting under a bridge, humming a tune. The same tune. Charles's heart nearly stopped. Lily, he whispered, stay here. He approached slowly, pulse racing, hope flickering. But as he got closer, the figure vanished. Like smoke, like a memory. But in its place, carved into the wood of the bridge, were the same 5 words. The river remembers its promises. Charles stood frozen beneath the bridge, staring at the carved words as the river murmured softly beside him. The wind was calm, but his mind raced. Was it really the boy, or just his imagination filling in the silence with hope? Either way, the message was clear. Some promises are bigger than people, older than science, and deeper than logic. Charles ran his fingers over the carved letters, as if hoping to absorb their meaning. Behind him, Lily's voice rang out. Daddy? Are you okay? He turned, wiping his face, smiling. Yes, sweetheart. I think I finally understand. But even as he spoke those words, he knew his journey wasn't over. There was more to this than a miracle. There was a mystery still waiting to be unraveled. In the weeks that followed, Charles became obsessed with symbols. The river, the song, the boy's strange way of speaking. He began researching ancient cultures, traditional medicine, stories of healers throughout time. He found references to children believed to be gift bearers, souls born with the ability to awaken healing in others. Myths from India, Africa, South America. Different words, but the same pattern. A child arrives, touches lives, and vanishes. Charles wasn't a spiritual man, but now he couldn't help wondering, what if this wasn't chance? What if Lily had been chosen? He began funding expeditions to forgotten villages, interviewing elders, connecting with spiritual leaders. He didn't want fame. He didn't want to exploit the mystery. He wanted to protect it, to understand how someone with nothing could carry something so powerful. And with every trip, every story he uncovered, he felt the boy closer. Not physically, but spiritually, like his presence had never truly left. And always in the background, Lily was his anchor. She walked with ease now, danced, laughed, painted. Her art? Always rivers, flowing infinite, alive. One day, while visiting a small town in Nepal, Charles met a monk who didn't speak much English. But when Charles showed him the carved words in a photo, the monk's eyes widened. He led Charles to a dusty room filled with scrolls. On one thousands of years old was the symbol of a boy by the river, the same melody Charles had heard, written in ancient notation. The monk only said one word, summer. Charles asked what it meant. The monk smiled, placed a hand over his heart, and whispered, "He who returns only when forgotten." The words stayed with Charles. He began to believe that the boy, Samar, was more than human, or maybe just the purest form of one. A vessel of compassion untouched by greed, untouched by pain. Maybe the boy didn't heal Lily's legs through power, but through love, through the kind of presence that the world had long forgotten. A presence Charles himself had forgotten. Until that day, in the hospital hallway. Back home, Charles changed everything. He sold one of his luxury estates and used the money to open the first river center, a sanctuary for children battling chronic conditions. No machines, just warmth, stories, connection. And in every building carved above the entrance were those same 5 words. The river remembers its promises. Lily, now a teenager, volunteered there every week, and every child she touched smiled a little wider, stood a little taller. It was as if the boy's gift had passed to her, like a flame gently transferred from one candle to another, never diminished, only multiplied. But the story wasn't over, because one evening, as Charles was locking up the center alone, he heard something familiar, the river song, this time with footsteps. Charles turned slowly, heart thudding, the soft notes of the river's song drifting through the air like mist. The lights inside the center had already been dimmed, casting long shadows across the garden path. The melody was clearer now, gentle, but filled with the same haunting strength he remembered. And there, standing beneath the willow tree by the water, was a silhouette, small, barefoot, still. Charles's breath caught in his throat. He stepped forward, not daring to speak, afraid the boy might vanish again if he said a single word. The boy didn't move, just stood there, gazing at the rippling current, as if listening to something only he could hear. Charles stopped a few feet away. "It's you," he whispered, voice trembling. The boy finally turned. Same eyes, wide and ancient. Same face, young and weathered by something deeper than time. But now the boy was smiling. "She dances now," the boy said. "I saw her with the paints." Charles nodded, unable to speak, tears stinging his eyes. Why did you help her?" Charles finally managed to ask. The boy tilted his head, as if confused by the question. "Because she believed," he said, "and because you needed her more than she needed you." Those words landed heavy on Charles's heart. He thought he had saved his daughter's life with money, with doctors, with desperation. But now he realized Lily had saved his. The boy stepped closer, placing a small, calloused hand over Charles's chest. "You were broken," he said softly, "and she was the only thing keeping the river from overflowing." A moment passed. Then the boy lowered his hand and looked out toward the water. "It's almost time for me to go," he said. "There are other rivers, other songs." "Wait," Charles said, voice cracking. "I still don't understand. Who are you?" The boy smiled again. "I am the memory you tried to forget, the kindness you buried under gold, the child you once were before you stopped believing in magic." Charles stepped back, overwhelmed. It was too much, and yet everything made sense. The boy had never been a stranger. He was a mirror, a message, a guide sent by the current of life itself. Charles opened his mouth to say something more, but the boy had already turned away, walking slowly toward the riverbank. "Will I see you again?" Charles called. The boy paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Only when you're not looking for me." Then in the blink of an eye, he stepped into the water and vanished. No splash, no ripple, just gone. The river flowed calmly, as if it had always known this moment would come. That night, Charles sat alone beneath the stars, replaying every word, every glance, every note of the melody. And for the first time in decades, he felt whole. Not because the mystery had been solved, but because it had awakened something in him that success never could. The power of wonder, the courage to believe, the strength to change, not just the world, but himself. And that's the lesson hidden in this unbelievable tale, that sometimes healing doesn't come through answers. It comes through presence, through the unexpected, through those brief shining encounters that remind us we are more than what we own, more than what we fear, and far more capable of love than we allow ourselves to believe. The River Center flourished in the years that followed. More than a sanctuary, it became a movement, a beacon of light for families who had lost hope, for children who felt forgotten. The halls echoed with laughter, art, music, and stories whispered at bedtime. And at the center of it all was Lily. She became known as the girl who walked again. But more than that, she became a symbol of what could happen when love met belief, and when miracles were allowed to unfold in their own time, their own way. Her art was celebrated across the world, not just for its beauty, but for the truth it carried. Every stroke, every river she painted, held within it the memory of the boy who had once said, "I can heal your daughter's legs." Charles continued his work, but now with a heart that had been reshaped. He no longer clung to logic like a lifeline. Instead, he embraced the mystery. He wrote books, not just about medicine or healing, but about his journey, about how a man with everything could be so empty, and how a barefoot boy in rags taught him the value of listening, of seeing, of feeling. One of his books became a bestseller. Its title? When the River Spoke. In the dedication he wrote, "To Lily, who taught me how to walk again, and to the boy who reminded me that some miracles were muddy feet." Despite the fame, Charles stayed grounded. Every Sunday, he'd sit by the river with Lily, just watching it flow. It became their ritual. They rarely spoke during these visits. They didn't need to. The silence between them was filled with understanding. And sometimes, when the wind carried the right note, they could still hear the boy's melody rising from the water. Faint but familiar, a song that no longer haunted, but healed. One evening, a young girl arrived at the river center. Her legs had been paralyzed since birth. Her parents had tried everything. They'd heard about Lily and Charles and came with a last flicker of faith. Lily took the girl's hand, just like the boy had once taken hers. She said nothing. She didn't promise miracles. She simply sat with her, painted with her, listened to her stories. Weeks passed, and then one morning the girl stood, slowly, shakily, but she stood. Doctors were baffled. The news spread, but Charles only smiled and whispered to himself, "The river remembers its promises." It wasn't just about legs that moved. It was about hearts that opened, about hope that returned. And over time, the River Center inspired similar centers around the world, all built on the same principle. Healing begins not in the body, but in the soul, in connection, in compassion, in the belief that we are not alone, and that sometimes the most extraordinary things come wrapped in the most ordinary forms. And while the world moved forward busy as ever, there were still those quiet corners where the melody of the river played, where a barefoot boy might be seen just for a second, under a tree or near a bridge, where someone broken might be reminded that they, too, could be whole again, if only they believed. Years later, Charles stood before a crowd of thousands, older now, gray streaking his hair, but his voice steady, warm, and full of something far greater than experience, full of meaning. He had been invited to speak at a global summit on healing and humanity. Cameras flashed. People waited in silence. But he didn't start with science. He didn't recite data or quote prestigious journals. Instead, he told a story. The story of a broken man, a paralyzed daughter, a barefoot beggar, and a river that somehow knew more than any of them. As he spoke, tears rolled down faces across the auditorium, not because they understood every part of the story, but because something inside them remembered what it felt like to hope, to hurt, to be healed. He ended with a pause, then said, "Sometimes healing doesn't look like what we expect. Sometimes it whispers through the cracks. It sings through strangers. And if you're lucky, it arrives when you finally let go of trying to control everything." Afterward, a little boy approached the stage, thin, quiet, eyes shining. He handed Charles a folded piece of paper. No words, just a drawing. A man in a suit kneeling before a small barefoot boy by the river. Charles opened his mouth to ask something, but the boy was already gone. He smiled, tucked the drawing into his pocket, and looked up at the sky. Maybe it had all been real. Maybe it had been a dream. But either way, it had changed everything. This story is more than just a fairy tale. It's a reflection of what we forget too often. That value doesn't always wear a suit. That truth can come from the mouths of children. And that sometimes the answer we need most is the one that breaks every rule we've ever followed. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you once were or someone you want to become, I ask just one thing. Leave a like. It helps more people feel what you just felt. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story that might heal a part of you that still needs to be seen. And comment below. What moment in this story moved you the most? I read every message, and I'd love to hear what stayed with you. Thank you very much. See you soon.